Welcome to Maestra Productions podcast, where we share stories about arts, education, and social justice movements.
Today we honor the life and legacy of Ms Dorie Ladner, a major grassroots leader in the 1960s Mississippi civil rights and voting rights movements. As a teenager, Ms. Ladner joined the Jackson NAACP Youth Council, which was led by Medgar Evers. Due to her political activism, while still in her freshman year, she was expelled from Jackson State. She transferred to Tougaloo College and soon after began working full-time for the movement. She worked on voter registration and community organizing projects in the Mississippi Delta, becoming the SNCC project director in Natchez, Mississippi. She was one of the founders of the Council of Federated Organizations, which brought together the main civil rights organizations in Mississippi, including SNCC, CORE, the NAACP, and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. This interview with Ms. Ladner was conducted in 2017 by Maestra Productions in collaboration with Bowie State University and Teaching for Change.
My name is Dorie Ladner. I was born June 28, 1942 in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, which is the southern part of the state of Mississippi near the Gulf Coast and New Orleans, Louisiana. And Hattiesburg is a small town. The population was, at that time, was probably 40, 50,000. And we had still have two colleges there, University of Southern Mississippi and William Carey College. And later on, Pearl River Junior College has been added. Growing up, I grew up in Palmer's Crossing, which was an all-black community, and the grocery store in our community was owned by Mr. Hudson, a white man, the only white person I had contact with at that time. It was a closely knit community. I had a lot of large extended family from my mother's side, aunts and uncles, grandmothers, and grandfathers, and the school and the church were in the community. I initially attended the Priest Elementary School, and they later consolidated school and became Earl Trevelyan Learning Center. And later on, I learned that all of the schools, black schools, had been consolidated into one center. Children from as far away as Brooklyn, Mississippi, which may have been 40 or 50 miles, were bused into Hattiesburg, to Palmer's Crossing, to attend school. And we had very limited supplies in terms of material things, books to read. We got second and third hand books from the white kids who disposed of them after they had used the books. We would look at their names in the books. Sometimes 3 and 4 names were in those school books that we received from them. And we sometimes would call their names out. And they had these big shiny buses in new school, which wasn't too far from us. And as I got older, I started learning that they had this nice big school and these nice shiny buses, and here these kids coming all the way from Brooklyn and other various parts of the county, Forest County, and they would bust in to Palmer's Crossing. And I didn't think it was right. We didn't live that far from the school. We could walk, which was like less than a mile from where we lived. We could go home for lunch. And that stopped after I got into maybe middle school. But I had a good upbringing because I enjoyed my extended family. My mother's she was the fifth of 11 siblings, and my grandmother, Martha Gates, who married my grandfather, Joseph Woolard, and later on she married Cousin Bud Battle. We called him Cousin Bud. He was my grandfather's cousin, but they were not, my grandmother and he were not blood related after my grandfather died. But all that went into my own sense of family and community. We had Priest Creek Baptist Church there, which was our only outlet because, we had the church and the school, and then we had the juke joints, which was the dichotomy was quite stark, because a lot of bootleg liquor was sold in the community. A lot of people sold the liquor, and every Monday the sheriff would come and collect his money from all the bootleggers, and a lot of them were on the street that I grew up on, and they had little juke joints on my street. The influence from them were not negative because my mother and my stepfather did not drink, smoke, or do any of that. And we would go to the little shack and get our sodas for our parents, but they gave us the utmost respect. And another thing that made me feel so good was that for every A that I got, I would get a dime for it from the lady who ran the little juke joint, chicken shack. For every A, and my name was Dot. Dot, every A you get, I'm going to give you a dime. And of course, I was too happy to go to Miss May Mixon and show her my report cards growing up. And see, that really helped me to understand that somebody else was paying attention to what I was doing. And in school, you know, I always had the ability to read and spell. We participated in reading contests and spelling contests, and had a whole lot of extracurricular activities, the Tri-High-Y, the 4-H Club, National Homemakers of America, the Glee clubs, and we traveled across the state participating in all these character building kind of programs that were brought to the black kids. The white kids had the same thing, but we were segregated. And in the classroom, the teachers sacrificed a lot because they would buy books for us because they weren't getting money for the library books. And they would take from their little salaries and put money into the school for our reading materials and other things that we needed. And I was talking earlier, I said our teachers don't get enough credit for the work that they did for us. You know, they talk about the segregated schools, but our teachers were as well qualified, as well trained as the white teachers, more so, a lot of them, because some of my teachers continued graduate work. Miss Mercer went to Indiana University, got her master's degree and so forth, but they were segregated. And we were privy to a lot of one-on-one training and learning. They wanted us to be the best, and they made sure that we excelled. And I was glad to excel. And of course, my parents were more than happy that we excelled. We had no choice but to excel. So all in all, I really liked school. I liked learning. I loved to read. But unfortunately, we didn't have access to books and newspapers and so forth. So there was a medicine man, Dr. McLeod, he sold root medicine, and NAACP memberships, which were unlawful at the time. He would come around and bring books in Chicago Defender and Pittsburgh Courier for us to read, and my mother would talk to them, but that was only outside reading material that we got. And I had this hunger and this thirst for knowledge and wanted to know what was beyond where I was in Palmer's Crossing. And it was just a curious kind of concern that I had. Downtown Hattiesburg, was segregated, and lunch counters were segregated. Only contact that I had with white people were riding the bus. There was a bus primarily to take domestics back and forth to work from Palmer's Crossing to the city to work as domestics for white people and so forth. So on the bus, the driver was so hateful. I was listening to Miss Rosa Parks talk about her encounters with the man who arrested her on the bus, and she had gotten tired. But she was prepared to be arrested that day, but the only time I came in full contact with white people were on the bus, the city bus, because we were totally segregated like South Africa. So when you came in contact with this kind of nasty and irate behavior, calling you the N-word, I used to hear the man tell all the people, "Get back, you N's." He would stand up and curse and carry on, and I really resented it. I was a small child. My mother would send me downtown to pay bills for her, but that was the only contact I really had with white people until much, much later.
Well, that's super interesting. Wow, that's amazing. How did you get involved in the freedom movement?
Well, Mr. Clyde Kennard, Kennarde, Clyde Kennard. There's a story online about the sad story of Clyde Kennard. You can, it's online. He was a young man who had attended the University of Chicago, was from Hattiesburg, a Korean War veteran, returned home after his stepfather died because his mother was running a chicken farm. He came home to help her to run a chicken farm. And he wanted to enroll in the University of Southern Mississippi. But the powers that be did not want him to enroll because it was a segregated school. It was, at that time, it was called University of Southern Mississippi. It was Mississippi Southern as University of Southern Mississippi. And so the first time, they said that he had come on the campus with stolen, with moonshine in the trunk of his car. And the second time, they alleged that he had been the recipient of stolen chicken feed. And he was jailed and subsequently ended up in Parchment Penitentiary with 7 years of hard labor for receiving these 5 sacks of stolen chicken feed, which he didn't do. But they did that to keep him from going to school. But he was one of my early mentors, Mr. Vernon Damer, D-A-H-M-E-R, was also NAACP, Forest County NAACP president. And he was very involved in making sure that people attempted to register to vote. At that time, I was not old enough to vote, but the elders could not vote, register to vote, could not vote. And he was encouraging people to vote and also selling NAACP memberships. He owned a lot of land in Forest County. And his home was firebombed by the Klan. And his family was able to get out, but he engaged them in firepower. But he sustained third-degree burns all over his body. And he subsequently succumbed to death maybe a day or so later. There in Forest County. And he was one of my earliest mentors. He used to drive my sister Joyce and me, and along with his sister Eileen Beard, to Jackson, Mississippi, where we met Medgar Evers, who was field secretary of the NAACP. And Mr. Evers, was killed June 12, 1963. Tomorrow will be his 53 from 74, 54 years. He would be dead this coming tomorrow. From Mr. Kennard, who was our NAACP Youth Council advisor, who was put in jail. Mr. Vernon Damer was burned to death in his house, trying to get out of his house. And then Mr. Medgar Evers was murdered. So these were 3 early influences in my life who mentored me. And I have this drive in me, this passion in me to continue to carry the work forward. Mr. Damer's sister, Eileen Beard, who's also an early influence, she was a member of our church, and she and my mother were good friends. So these are people that I'm honoring every day of my life, trying to uphold the standards that they set and to carry the work forward. And they sacrificed so much for me to be able to be here and to talk to you, and for all of us to be able to have a better way of life in this country.
Definitely. And during that period, with those mentors, how was it like on a day in, day out, dealings with them? Like, what was a day that you, how would you describe a day that you experienced being mentored by Medgar Evers or some of the other mentors that you, what were some of the things that they did?
Well, see, this was like during the late 50s and early 60s. Young people had a different role than they do now. Older people were respected, like I'm called Ms. Dorie, and that's the way we respected them. And we would sit and listen, and we were not engaging them in a lot of dialogue and so forth, because we were to listen and to learn, and by example. And Mr. Evers did talk to us, about our rights, about my parents paying taxes and not getting the full benefit of paying taxes. We didn't have sidewalks, we didn't have street lights, we didn't have a lot of things. At the school I attended, the toilets, the sewage line was not good, and the sewage would run on the campus and so forth. But we didn't have a day-to-day kind of engagement with them. They were so much older than we were, and we were children, in their opinion. Now, as I got older and enrolled in Jackson State University, my freshman year, we went north to Jackson because the University of Southern Mississippi and William Carey College was segregated. So I had to go north, 90 miles north to Jackson State. And Mr. Medgar Evers' office was across the street from Jackson State. And every Wednesday we got a half day off. So I would go across the street and talk to him about my freedom. And at that time, he would talk to us and tell us about freedom. You know, we were unsophisticated, didn't really know that there was no movement activity, but I had this feeling that I didn't want to live this way. And see, I had been exposed to Emmett Till's death. That was the beginning of my awakening. He was a year older than I, and I felt that if they had done it to him, they would do it to me. Although he was like 200 some miles north of where I lived, I felt his pain, you know, looking at his photographs in the Johnson Publishing Company Jet magazine, and reading about his case and looking at the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments to the Constitution being cited, but I didn't know what they meant because I'd never heard of a Constitution. So I'm going backwards, but I went to my social studies teacher, Mr. Clark, and I said, what does this mean, 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment? He said, that has something to do with the Constitution. And I went and found the Constitution. And I memorized those articles for my own empowerment. And, you know, I was like 14 years old, but I felt it would make me feel better, which it did, but I still had this yearning and this passion, this desire to want to know more. And my real contact came at Jackson State when Mr. Evers told us that some people were coming to help us to get our freedom. And I didn't really know what it meant, but he was talking about the Freedom Riders. And we'd already been tear gassed on Jackson State's campus and being subjected to being expelled because we marched in solidarity with Tougaloo, nine students from Tougaloo College, the school from which I later graduated from, a private school, because they attempted to desegregate the public library in Jackson, Mississippi. Blacks could not attend the library. And we attempted to march in solidarity with them, but we were tear gassed coming out of Jackson State's campus. There's a whole long story about that. But that only made me want to do more. Being expelled from Jackson State was a little short, long story about a prayer in the dorm. And my mother was strict, you know, talking about the children have their place, and I'm sure you were exposed to that children to be quiet when adults talk. You go sit in a child's seat, you know, not to engage in grown folks' conversation. But the dorm council went and told the dean of students that I had prayed a prayer and he needed to talk to me. I was president of the dorm council. And so she told me that the dean wanted to see me. And I told my sister, Joyce, so she said, you want me to go with you? I said, yes. So we went there, and he wanted to know about the prayer that I had prayed. And, you know, it was I was critical about this. Of course, you know, we grew up in the church, and it became nonsensical to me. You know, you questioned me about a prayer. The only thing I knew about Montgomery, Alabama, is I heard that some people were walking in Alabama. That was how much news we were getting, because the media would not give us information. You know, they say information is power. We were not getting information. It was a dark curtain pulled down. We had no access to outside information. That's how much in the dark we were. So when he started asking about this prayer, and then that was Dean Gill, and so Dean Gill referred me to the dean of students, Dr. Oscar Rogers, who graduated from Tougaloo College and Harvard University, and he came down very hard. And he said that he didn't want anybody on campus disrupting things. And so he said, Ms. Ladner, I'm going to hip you before I ship you. And I'm still, you know, very much in the dark. But to make a long story short, I was expelled, my sister was expelled by default. And so I said, I don't want to be on this campus anyway. And I was forced to begin to take more action. James Meredith was on the campus. That was before he attempted to enroll in the University of Ole Miss, and a lot of other young people who were in the Greek Panhellenic Council. I played Delta Sigma Theta sorority at that time, and we would sit in the student union building and talk. So they were able to school me more. I was, 17 years old, and, they were upperclassmen. And Mr. Evers was engaged, with us, but when we went to Chicago that summer and worked and came back and enrolled at Tougaloo that fall, I didn't see Jackson State anymore. And at that time, when I got back, the Freedom Riders were there, and I was like, oh my God, hallelujah, hallelujah. At 1072 Lynch Street, you'll hear me use that because that's where all the meetings were held, where Mr. Medgar Evers' office was, right there on Lynch Street. 1072, the Masonic Temple. And so we got there and met all the Freedom Riders, young Freedom Riders. They were young black and white people from across the country who had ridden in on the buses. And I saw Marion Barry, Tom Hayden, Casey Hayden, John Lewis, Charles McDougall, all these young people. And it's like, oh my God, where have you been all my life? Because I was isolated. I was like a child in the wilderness, sort of dangling around looking for somebody to link up to. And when they came there in full force, Diane Nash, James Bell, all these people said, oh my God, where have you been all my life? And that was the beginning of my awakening in terms of making these connections with young people such as myself. And see, some of the Freedom Riders remained in Mississippi. They opened an office on Lynch Street. And Lynch Street is significant because J.R. Lynch, the initials J.R. Lynch, he was a United States representative, black representative to the United States Congress during Reconstruction, young black man. So the street named for him. But we were so fully engaged in going to Tougaloo College where there were no restrictions. And it was a very relaxed atmosphere for learning, and also it was, we had all kinds of arts and all kinds of people coming on campus. Dr. Martin Luther King came on campus. You had Joe Baez, Bob Dylan, all kinds of Pete Seeger, all kinds of people coming on campus. Dr. Ralph Bunch. And this was so much of an enrichment for us, to be able to meet these people. And Jackson State was a state-run school. That's the difference. Tougaloo College was one of those colleges set up during Reconstruction, the same as Howard University and others by the Missionary Association. And so it had its own charter, in which the state kept trying to revoke, but they couldn't. And so I felt so relaxed, and then I met a cadre of young people on campus, Tougaloo's campus. They were from Mississippi, and it was, oh my God. And the summer of '62 was when I went to the Delta and started working with Bob Moses and Charlie Cobb, and I met Charlie there. He was on his way to Texas to NAACP meeting. He stopped at our office there on Lynch Street, and Lawrence Guillot, Jesse Harris, and me were in the office, and he said he was going to NAACP meeting in Texas. And he said, why are you going there? The revolution is here. So, and they got in his face, and he decided he would stay in Mississippi. And that's how Charlie started working in Mississippi. But, and we went to the Delta. And I had never, I remember about Emmett Till being murdered in the Delta. And then when we went up to the Delta to organize the Council of Federated Organization, COFO, that was a whole nother thing, because I didn't know that black people were not allowed on the streets after sundown. You could not be seen on the streets in a lot of these towns. And I was a victim of it, along with the people in the car that I was riding with, including the driver. He was arrested when the Council of Federated Organization, known as COFO, was founded in Clarksdale.
And you're one of the founding members?
Yes. Mm-hmm. we rode up there, and police stopped us on the side of the road and said we'd violated the curfew. I'd never heard of it, and I'm from Mississippi. But see, these are all kinds of things that my ancestors were confronting. And I said, no, no, no. And we decided to stay in the Delta because that's where you had the largest majority of black population. And Anza Moore, who's local NAACP president, had asked Bob Moses, who ran the Mississippi Project, to try and start a project there to register voters. And that's where we found Miss Fannie Lou Hamer in that county. And the rest is history. Ms. Hamer was taken to the courthouse along with a busload of other people from the plantations, and they were not allowed to register to vote, but the movement started there in the Delta.
I just want to ask how was it being the only female? Was it, treated the same? What was it? Or was it just nothing? It wasn't even a thought.
Wasn't a thought. But you heard my testimony, right?
Yes.
And I was speaking about my own vision, and that was it. I wasn't looking around to see who was coming with me.
Right.
Self-directed, yes, with my ancestors' prayers and other people who had nurtured me along the way. But I had my own vision. And there's a song we say, if you don't go, I'm going to go anyhow. I'm on my way.
To freedom?
Yeah. Well, that's the song. If you don't go, I'm going. See, back then, women were still not out like later on. I'm talking about Miss Hamer and so forth, and they started coming out. They were always in the church, in the background, running things, but never out front.
So, can you speak to your experience as a woman in those days during that movement with so many men?
I saw myself as a freedom fighter and never thought about my gender, so to speak, because I had my own vision about what I saw for black people and what we should have and what we didn't have. And I use the phrase, the line was drawn in the sand, and I stepped over the line. I didn't see it as being female or male role. All I knew is that I had to do something about what was going on with my life and my people. And that was the way I saw it. Now, these other individuals happen to be male, that was coincidental. But I was part of whatever was going to happen. And I was in the forefront, and I wanted to remain in the forefront. And I didn't have this, I was never what you call scared, but I'm not saying I was foolish or anything, but I have this personality that doesn't frighten easily. Some people say I'm an intimidator, but I don't see it that way, but I just see it that if my rights are involved, I will fight to the death.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that probably speaks to your position as one of the founding members of the Council of Federated Organizations. Yes,
we had begun to work with Robert Moses, who helped to develop the project in Mississippi, and Charlie and late Jesse Harris, Hollis Watkins, myself, MacArthur Cotton, a lot of us joined up with him to start working in Mississippi, primarily on voter registration, because they'd had the discussion about whether there should be sit-ins, and everybody knows that Mississippi wasn't big enough to curse the cat. There was nothing there to integrate, so to speak, in terms of Woolworth lunch counters and all that. So the direct action was actually going to the courthouse to attempt to register to vote. And we'd already experienced one death, Mr. Herbert Lee, who was killed in Liberty, Mississippi, by State Representative William Hurst trying to register to vote. He was shot in cold blood right there in the town square. And the State Representative Hurst never served a day. And the decedent was accused of starting the fight. And that story was passed on down to me when I joined SNCC. Mr. Herbert Lee was killed in cold blood. And so the education came, literacy came in a lot of forms, because in order to register to vote, you had to interpret this Constitution of Mississippi, these amendments to the Constitution of Mississippi. And the shortest one, if I recall correctly, was no person shall be in prison for death. And that was the shortest one, for debt, D-E-B-T, not death, for debt. And you would try to interpret that to your best of your ability to the chancellor clerk, the county clerk there, and you never passed. So a lot of people were not able to read or write, and that was due to early on they had not been given the monies that had been passed down from the Freedmen's Bureau to the different counties for black people to be able to go to school. The monies were taken by the local authorities and used to show up their plantations and to use it for what they wanted. And Bob Moses is trying to get an education amendment to the Constitution passed in the United States of America right now. Because how can you hold people responsible for being illiterate when you have denied them education? And going back to the whole issue of literacy, as I started out, education was emphasized in my home by my parents and my relatives. They didn't have a very high formal education, but they felt that we should know how to read and write and should get educated. My mother always said, go to school, get an education, work and take care of yourself. Don't depend on any man to take care of you. And I started hearing this from early on. Be independent was what she was saying. Work and take care of yourself. And that was with me. So I figured that if I got an education, that I could take care of myself. And I was always fiercely independent. So when I left home that June of 1962, after school was out of Tougaloo College, I went back to Jackson. I told my mother after I had gotten home that as I had packed my little orange suitcase in Palmer's Crossing, and I said, on my way out the door, I said, Mother, I'm going to Jackson to work with Bob Moses to get my freedom. And Mother turned around, she didn't know what I was talking about. And I dashed out the door, the screen door was slamming, and I ran and got on the little bus to go downtown and went to the Greyhound bus station. Got on the bus and went to Jackson, went to the Freedom House on Rose Street. Now in the Freedom House, there were all these guys there. So I went and found my own bed. Sometimes we had to sleep together, you know. That didn't matter either because we were there for freedom. We weren't there for intimate purposes. We were very vigilant about our work, you know. When your mind is on issues, you tend to delay a lot of things in terms of intimacy and so forth. So, and I knew that being the only female, I wouldn't be effective if I started sleeping around with the guys anyway. I couldn't be effective. And got into the Freedom House, and shortly after being there is when we told that we were going to Clarksdale for the founding of COFO. And we all rode up there. And as I said, I had read about the Delta, heard all these horrible stories. Emmett Till was murdered there, and I had never been there. And when I got there, I had this horrible feeling. And the time we got into this meeting, the fire department came and said they heard that there was a fire there, and they came in with the water hoses, and they said, there's no fire here. But there was a fire starting, but they were trying to intimidate us. We didn't move. And so they waited until 12 midnight, and we were adjourning, and then that's when they said we had violated the curfew. Dave Dennis from CORE was the one driving the car that I was in. I was in the car with Dave Dennis, Cody Liddell, Matty Bivens, my cousin, and Lester McKenna, who's also known as Baba Zulu here in Washington. And he was a freedom rider from Tennessee. And police stopped us on the dark highway just before we got to Mount Bayou, an all-black town. Mount Valley is a very significant town in the annals of Black history. MoundbayoU. When you get a chance, you can read about it. But we didn't make it to Mount Valley, and the police stopped us and kept Dave Dennis in the back in the car behind us for almost an hour. And Dave came back and said, "Man, this man is crazy." Said he wants to take me to jail. He's asked me about my dad and asked me where I got these blue eyes from and all this, and said he's gonna arrest me. Y'all follow me back to jail. So we proceeded to follow him, got to the jail, and they told us, "Get the F out of there." And we didn't know where we were going. I mean, we were, Delta's like blacker than 1,000 midnights. Nothing but the stars and this flat land. And we were bumbling around this car and just frightened to death. I mean, really scared. And we got to Mr. Amsden Moore's house in Cleveland, Mississippi, between 5:30 and 6 that next morning. But we had to go through this little town called Ruleville, Ruleville, where Miss Hamer was from. And we had been told that the man who was the night watchman in Ruleville was one of the brothers who had murdered Emmett Till, Bryant, the older man. And oh my God, when I saw the sign said Ruleville, I was on the floor of the car and I said, "Lester," the name was Lester McKinney, "don't go," I think the speed limit said 22 miles an hour. "Don't go 22, don't go under 22. I was frightened to death. So when we got to Amsden Moore's house, you know, all that fear had been washed away. And this is where what Booker T. Washington said, "Put your bucket down where you are." And that's where we remained and started working for real. But getting back to education, the whole thrust of the Freedom Summer, for instance, was not only for, in order to do anything, you had to have some form of literacy. There were people who were driving without driver's license, but they had been able to function in the little communities where they were because they knew the powers that be, you know, the sheriff and the deputy, and most of the people were literate, white and black, let's face it. So they were able to get by, and the parents had been able to go to the store, and you live in these little small communities, and they didn't know how to read. But when their children started going to school, I was born in 1942. My mother was born in 1921. Her mother was born in 1896. Okay, so you're talking about 2 or 3 generations removed from enslavement. And so the education was being handed down. You're making sure your children and your grandchildren are being educated. And a great deal of emphasis was placed on that literacy because so much had been taken, land and all kinds of other things were taken away from you because of your inability to be able to read and write. And I've looked at some records. I do a lot of genealogical research where one of my great-grandfathers had picked all this cotton, and he came from Chickasaw County, Mississippi. He was born in South Carolina, and he picked enough cotton to buy hundreds of acres of land in Wayne County. But then I saw how he'd begun to lose it by signing a document. One of the chancellor clerks, somebody had him sign it, and he started losing the land. So they understood they were losing, but they couldn't understand what was on the dotted line. My grandparents could read and write, and my father's mother born like 18. My father's mother, yeah. My dad's born in 1914. His birthday is June 13th, 1914, and his mother was born in 1888. So they wanted to make sure that all their children were literate. And in the movement, and with everybody coming together from all parts of the state, I dare say that this was the first time that people from across the state of Mississippi and most of these southern states in the United States have been able to join forces. During that Reconstruction period, we had only like 7 to 8 years of so-called freedom before the black codes were enacted. The Klan and all this came back in and started reinforcing segregation at the most vicious part of the height of the Confederacy, for the most part, intimidation, taking land and so forth from people. And so there were some schools that I can't say that everybody was not educated, but the mass majority were not educated. And people knew that if you knew how to sign on a dotted line, knew how to read and knew how to write, that they can't take it away from you. They always said, educate, you can't take it away from you. You heard that, right? You get your education, they can't take it away from you, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I heard that all my life too. So get an education and they can't take it away from you. And that's what we learned. And most of the people that I knew in my community wanted us to learn how to read and write and to be able to count. Most people count in their heads anyway. So the fastest counters that I've ever encountered were people who were illiterate, but they could count money and they could count backward and forward and everything. But they couldn't read and write, but they could count. And with the formal infusion, people like James Foreman, who executive director of SNCC, who was a school teacher himself and an organizer, a cooperative organizer, he came in with the whole concept of literacy, as well as Bob Moses, who had been a school teacher in New York and attended Harvard and was teaching school when he came to Mississippi. And so a lot of the kids from the North came. Charlie had attended Howard University, and Charlie Cobb had attended Howard University, and a lot of kids from Howard came to Mississippi. I was at Tougaloo College, and a lot of us from the college community went into the movement, but then you had all the others in the community who were part of the movement. And each person contributed in their own way, whatever way they could. Everybody had a turn, okay? You may not have been as articulate as he was, but what you had to say was important, okay? Everybody had a role, so the whole concept was drawn up by Miss Ella Baker. I'm using all this information right now, you can edit it. But Miss Baker was of the opinion that everybody should participate. It was a democracy. And all the students who were in the room would come together, the SNCC, had the right to have something to say about what they were going to do in terms of the organization, whatever the plan was. We didn't, in strategy, we didn't just get up and go outside and say, we're gonna demonstrate. We had strategized for maybe 2 or 3 days, 72 hours, to determine. It was done by consensus. Okay, so everybody had their input. And once you went over all this, then you would decide what you were going to do. And by doing this, each person was learning. It was a learning process. And the community people were the same way. And your biggest meeting place were your churches. They didn't know where to go but to the churches. They were the largest places. And so a lot of the ministers participated, and some of them didn't. Well, you had the members from the churches, and you had the children. So one of the most effective places was like Birmingham, Alabama, when the kids came out, the parents came out, right? So that's the way you organize a movement. The whole concept of literacy has been something that I'm thinking about the people in my family. My father's father and mother could read and write. My mother's parents could read and write, because you look on the census forms too. When you're looking at census forms, you go back, if you're doing any type of genealogy and so forth, they have over there, parents can read and write, yes. My great-grandmother could read and write. And so during the Freedmen's Bureau time, they had people to come in and set up schools, and they started teaching. I'm talking about the like Howard University and your older colleges. So a lot of kids weren't able to go, because the same thing that happened after that window of 7 to 10 years Reconstruction, people went back to that whole sharecropping system. And you, right there at the man's place, where you had been treated as, you'd been enslaved. Then you went back as a sharecropper, another form of enslavement, right? Michelle Alexander calls it New Jim Crow, but my persistent insistence is that it never went away. It's not new, it's the same thing that's been there all the time. It's just maybe more urban, but my exposure to it never left. There's some added things to it, with the mass incarceration. More jails are being built by private entities to incarcerate more people, which is another form of enslavement, but it's been there all the time. I know Parchman Penitentiary in Mississippi, the largest, one of the largest prisons I don't know about the country, but it used to be, but they enslaved people with nothing but a big plantation. And when we were working up in the Delta, several of our people, including Charlie, I think, spent time at Parchman Penitentiary. And Mr. Clyde Kennard was sent to Parchman, and before he died, he told me that they made him go out there and pick cotton. He was so weak, he was dying from cancer, stomach cancer, and he had on these broken shoes, and the mud was so thick on the ground that it would pull the soles off his shoes, and he would fall into the mud on the ground. And these guards would have the inmates pick him up and stand him up and make him try to pick again. And he was too weak to stand up. But that was the form of enslavement that they were subjecting him to, because he dared try to enroll in an all-white university, and they were teaching him a lesson. And that lesson was supposed to be sent back down to all of us. But I remember maybe 8 or 9 of the guys getting arrested in Greenwood with us SNCC, and I saw them in the courthouse there in Greenville, Mississippi. Their heads were all shaved, and they had lost so much weight, they were emaciated. And when I saw them come in, they lost, a lot of weight, like 30 pounds and more. And when they came in, and they were attempting to get people registered to vote. So all of this, I would like to say in a few words, is that has been some of my experiences, that there's nothing new, but I see more sophistication in a way with the these so-called, we started with the Richard Nixon, the war on crime and the war on drugs and whatever term they want to use to highlight something, an epidemic that they've already started, and with all these weapons of mass destruction abroad and in this country. They are purposely put into our communities to eradicate us, to keep us enslaved. The guns don't come by accident. The same gun makers that send them to Iraq and Iran are the same ones who put them in Baltimore and Chicago. Same manufacturers, same people. They're making money. They don't give a damn who buys them. All they want is the money. They don't care who they kill, because it's nothing but about money first and control. So each morning when I get up now, I see a new day. I'm talking about darkness, but each day brings about a new sunshine to me. And in my darkest hours, when I used to go to bed at night, not knowing whether or not I would get up or not the next day, in a place like Natchez, Mississippi, where the Klan was riding around, and the chief of police said, "I thought we'd kill you after they attempted to blow our house up." But I said, "No, I'm still here." But the point is that each day is a new day. Darkness may be here today. Next morning you wake up, there's a new day. Some people don't wake up. But the point is that as long as we're awake, we must work. We must do something to contribute to mankind, to make the world a better place for everybody. Everybody. And you can't just say that on my street we're going to have a stop sign, we're going to have street lights, because the next street over is dark. So you want light to be everywhere, right? Enlightenment. And that's the way that I came into the movement. I came to the movement as a person, a black person from the state of Mississippi, and I was 14 when I started. And you could hear me on Sirius XM radio. If you go to Dorie Ladner Photo Contact, and Sirius has a little excerpt there from an interview that I gave when I was going to Natchez, Mississippi, 2014. The interview was done by one of the guys at Sirius XM. But my whole contention was that they were having Dorie Ladner Day, and he said, "Aren't you excited?" I said, "No, it was never done for the glory. It was done for the people, you know. Why me? But I'm just a cog in the wheel. A cog, one spoke in this wheel. It takes all these spokes to make this wheel go round. And we don't ever want to say that I'm the only one. No. Before me, there were many. And after me, there will be many, hopefully. And all around us, there are people. And what we want to do is empower everybody. And that's the only way that we can make it whole. Right?
Yes.
This interview with Ms. Ladner was conducted in 2017 by Maestra Productions in collaboration with Bowie State University and Teaching for Change. The interview was conducted by Brian Barber and recorded by Kalisha Perry and Catherine Murphy.